and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB, and this is a very special day in the arena. It is recording the day after Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. Yes, the pro community in Magic has finally had their crack at the new standard format that we've been playing on Arena for some time now. And this is the winning deck. At the highest level of competition, this rose above them all. Who could have seen it coming? White aggro. Almost completely mono white aggro. So today's video is going to be a little different, a little special. We're going to go over the list, the full list, and we're going to do a sideboard guide for it. I'm also going to go over a budget version of the list and a best of one version of the list briefly. So we're going to talk about the deck for a while today. Let me know if you like this format, and please let me know in the comments if this is what you would like me to do more of. So Andrew Elenbogen wins Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica with an almost mono white list. You're going to see that they have red lands in the main for red cards that are only in the sideboard. Just similar to the Heroic Reinforcements deck that we covered last week. Or wait, I guess it was Sunday, so very recently. That was interesting timing. The Heroic Reinforcements video went up on Sunday when there was so much red-white aggro in the top 8 of the Pro Tour I was watching. Brilliant timing, right? Anyway, on to the subject. So this is the full list. Lots of small creatures. You see an insane amount of one-drop creatures. 18 plays on turn 1 that become creatures. And then Adanto Vanguard, the only worthy 2-drop, but this card is so hard to remove. You usually want to pay life with it when you attack, almost all the time, because your opponent's life total is under much more pressure than yours. Powerful 3-drops in Benalish Marshal, History of Benalia, and Venerated Loxodon is basically a 3-drop. You can count it right in there, but these make the creatures bigger, this makes the creatures bigger, these remove some opposing threats, 20 land, straightforward, that is how it's done. The sideboard has a few red surprises. There are actually 2 lands, 2 Clifftop Retreats in the sideboard. The reason they are in the sideboard is because if you draw 2 Clifftop Retreats in your opening hand and no other lands, they enter the battlefield tapped, and you never want that with this deck. Tapped lands are a big problem. You don't want to play Guild Gates in a deck like this, for example, unless you absolutely have to. So with 2 of the tapped lands coming out of the sideboard to increase the odds of being able to play the red cards, you're in an okay spot. And the red cards that are important: Experimental Frenzy and Banefire allow the deck to transform and diversify its threats, along with 3 Ajanis, 2 Response Resurgence, and Tocatli Honor Guard. Let's get into the sideboard guide. What you'll see is that I've created a different deck configuration to go over for each different opponent you may face. If you are in a best of 3 match with a red deck, or you just care about beating red decks, the changes you may want to make to the deck, and I should get this out of the way right away. These are my opinions. If you already know how to sideboard with this deck and have been playing it for months, you're welcome to share that information. It would be helpful to others. I wouldn't mind knowing myself. I have not played the deck for months. I'm making educated guesses. I've played Magic for many years, but I haven't played this specific deck. If you would sideboard differently, I haven't read a sideboard guide from Elenbogen himself. I did watch the matches of the Pro Tour, but sideboarding is a fluid thing. You should always be willing to change your sideboard plans based on the cards you see out of your opponent. But this is what I would do in generic matchups. So against red, I would look for better creature sizing by bringing in Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants. I'd bring in Tocatli Honor Guard and remove Adanto Vanguard, because Adanto Vanguard's paying life is probably bad against the red deck. This is one of the only matchups where you might find yourself on the back foot, but you can basically solve all of your issues if you do 2 things. 1, get a life-linking creature. 2, make sure that Chain Whirler can't blow you out. So to do that, we get in creatures with higher toughness like Tocatli. We get in Ajani, the Adversary of Tyrants, to buff our creatures out of that dreaded Chain Whirler range. I like having Response Resurgence available as a combat trick to blow up a Chain Whirler, something like that. Having a cheap removal spell for the matchup seems better than having Pride of the Conquerors, which may not help you very much. I don't know if I should put back in the 4th Loxodon. To be totally honest, Loxodon can prevent the Chain Whirler blowout, and it may be too essential in this matchup. And since we only brought in some of our 4 drops, so the 2 lands in the sideboard came in, and out came Skymarcher Aspirant because the 1 toughness makes it the easiest Chain Whirler bait. However, when I look at it more, I think that another line would be to take out one of the Clifftop Retreats, only add 1 more land because we added Ajani, and keep the 4th Loxodon available, which I think that the Loxodons outsizing your opponent's red creatures are very important. So there is a non-bow issue. Tocatli Honor Guard turns off your Loxodon. Keep that in mind. But the idea is that you play Tocatli on turn 2, it's very likely to get blasted, bolted, or killed somehow. So, do be aware of it. You may still just want a 4/4, but perhaps you end up throwing away your Tocatli in combat against a Chain Whirler only to untap and play your Loxodon. In the meantime, it can block the wizards all day long, so it has a pretty good job there. And this can kill Steamkin, which is probably their most terrifying card. All right, that's how I would sideboard against red. Let's talk about how I would sideboard against everybody's favorite, Golgari. Against Golgari, your matchup is very good and you don't have to change much. This is one where they will only have limited removal spells, and a huge Wild Growth Walker is one of the only foreseeable problems. All I did here was take out Venerated Loxodon and put in Tocatli Honor Guard. Tocatli Honor Guard shuts down so much of their deck, it stifles them, but they don't have easy ways to kill it when their Chupacabras don't work. Therefore, your Loxodons are more likely to not work at all, since unlike against red, you can just throw your Honor Guard away by blocking something. Golgari is more likely to try to grind you out with Planeswalkers, so you have to kill them quickly, meaning you don't have time to worry to play the non-bows. But that is what I would do. Loxodon's out, Honor Guard's in, and pound them into the ground, run them over with Pride of Conquerors. The next thing I'll touch on is the mirror. The mirror is just a tiny swap. I would take out 2 Conclave Tribunals because I don't find spot removal to be very, very good in the mirror. Tapping a few of your creatures and multiples of your lands to remove 1 threat. Maybe the Benalish Marshal is that good, but for the most part, that will punish you. And I think you kind of want to combo faster. So in comes Response Resurgence, which can be a removal spell if you're falling behind, or can be the Haymaker double attack step if you get ahead. That's all the only changes I would make for the mirror. Now you'll see the full sideboard come into play against control, where we have to go much bigger and have a diversity of threats available. Against control, you want to be able to resolve cards when they tap out to deal with your creatures. And those cards have to be able to generate value and do things every turn of the game for the rest of the game, so that you start getting further and further ahead of your opponent. So we bring in the lands, we bring in the Ajanis and the Experimental Frenzies. We also bring in the Banefire because settle the wreckage. So what we cut is much trickier. I like to cut Snubhorn Sentry because it can't attack for damage very quickly. I like to cut Pride of the Conquerors. This might be a mistake, but I don't like having to play into something like this because I'm always nervous that if my board gets swept, I'd rather have more threats to rebuild with than have a Pride of Conquerors stuck in my hand. This could be a bias on my own part. Conclave Tribunals, I like to take a few out. I like to leave a few. There might be those Crackling Drakes, Lyra Dawnbringers, Teferis that you want to wrap up sometimes, but I don't want to draw too many reactive spells. I want to make sure I'm still very aggressive, that my cards have power in the early game, which is why I removed Snubhorn Sentry and not Healer's Hawk. And then Ajani and Experimental Frenzy, you make your opponent deal with your board, make them kill your things, and then you play Ajani or Experimental Frenzy, and you get further ahead for the rest of the game until they deal with those permanents. Always try to minus Ajani to put a threat onto the battlefield if you don't have threats on the battlefield, and then worry about pumping up the threats that you have. I like to also trim a Loxodon. I get very nervous about tapping my creatures and skipping an attack step to play a Loxodon that could be essence scattered. It's happened to me enough times that I'm wary about it. So that's how I would build against control. Now we'll touch on a few other things. Best of one. If you do play this deck in best of one, remember to cut the red lands. They only hurt you and might cause you to pay 2 life for them to enter untapped. So remember to replace those with basic planes since your entire main deck is white. Second, a budget list. As I know some of you might see all those mythics and rares and find that completely out of reach, here are some of the cards that you get early in the game and how I would build this if I couldn't have as many. So I went to 2 Loxodons, spend a few rare wild cards, get a few Loxodons. In fact, I cut from 4 down to 2 of all the rares and mythics, because I still think that even on a budget, you should at least get some of the bones of the deck. But I do show other options to replace them if you need to. Getting Leonin War Leader in there if you have to remove cards like History of Benalia is not going to be nearly as good or consistent, same as Venerated Loxodon, but it does create more attackers and is a strong board presence, so you can bring it in. Make a stand also. The main thing that you lose when you lose your rares like Loxodon, Benalish Marshal, and History of Benalia are ways to make your creatures huge. So we need more ways to get our creatures through in combat. You could also just go up on Pride of the Conquerors, but you can also bring in this uncommon, which I believe you get at least 1 of for starting the game, make a stand. And then Hazard Marshal can replace some, and Hunted Witness can replace some amount of cards like Legion's Landing. 1-drops that are sort of sticky or can make more creatures. So that is how I would build the budget version of the deck and some changes I would make. It is overall a pretty budgety deck that you can get into. All right, next up, we're going to play the regular version of the deck in best of one, because I personally enjoy playing best of one, and I hope you enjoy the games. See you there. This hand is on the draw. Being on the play is wonderful, being on the draw, not so much. But this hand is very good. We have a landing into a Vanguard, which is a very strong card against most of the format right now. If we draw a land, we get to go History of Benalia. If we don't draw a land, we'll most likely draw creatures, which means we get to play our Loxodon. The cards we don't want off the top are more Tribunals or more 3-drops. So I believe it's worth keeping. That's only a small percentage of our deck that we have to avoid drawing. Leading off with Legion's Landing. Our opponent leading off with Forest, but without Llanowar Elf, already puts me in a good mood. Let's see if they have anything to block our Vampire token. A tapped Overgrown Tomb. I think the Golgari matchup is very good. The main thing that we have to do is get wide enough and finish the game quickly. Our hand is certainly set up to do that. So here comes the Adanto Vanguard. Remember that Adanto Vanguard holds priority because you can pay 4 life at any time to make it indestructible. So I try to pass priority and use the pass turn button rather often so that it doesn't slow the game down. And there's a Healer's Hawk. So now we have a few options. We can play History of Benalia, which is probably excellent. We can play Healer's Hawk and pump the squad with Venerated Loxodon, which also feels excellent. But we do give up an attack to pump with Loxodon this turn. So what are the main things that we worry about? Against Ritual of Soot, the Benalia is better because it will make a knight. The knight will get blown up, but then I will get another one. Against Ritual of Soot, we also keep our Vanguard no matter what. Our opponents, against Chupacabra, it's better to play Benalia because the 4/4 Loxodon is very helpful. The Loxodon play is the more aggressive, but I like the Benalia play better. All right, let's attack first. Here's the planes, here's the Benalia. Decisions like this about which threat to play seem very It seems like very frustrating when your opponent is thinking for a very long time about those types of decisions, but they are some of the more important decisions in the aggro deck. I've heard it said, you know, that certain decks are stupid. Stupid green, stupid white, stupid red. I've used this terminology myself on a few occasions, but the truth is that the deck is rarely stupid. The deck always contains decisions, and the decisions usually matter. It's whether or not players are flexible that is most important. So we have a large attack available. We also have Pride of the Conquerors available. Our opponent's at 15. If our opponent blocks and Pride of the Conquerors happens, they take about an extra 7 damage. Now we have 2 Pride of the Conquerors, and when we attack we can flip this, but the problem with that is that's not enough for Ascend by itself. We have to play the Hawk to Ascend. I believe it's best, since the best way our opponent gets back into the game, the best way that our opponent can make it back into the game is by sweeping the board. So to avoid getting blown out by a sweeper, I think it's best to use a Pride of the Conquerors right away, rather than take a turn off to play a Loxodon. That way, if the opponent sweeps us, we still got a ton of damage in from the creatures that we have, and we can rebuild towards a Loxodon. It was very important that we play the Hawk there so that we would Ascend. And let's do damage. And let's pass the turn. Also, another option was Conclave Tribunaling the Ranger and attacking. I like saving this for something that just can't get in the way or to do lethal damage. I don't like playing it anytime before that, especially against Golgari. They usually have multiple ways to blow up the enchantment and get their enter the battlefield triggers back. Opponent on 7 life. We know that 1 card is a memorial to folly, and they will find their Jadelight Ranger and replay it. That will certainly end the game in a number of ways. And they draw 2 lands off the top. Perhaps they're in a severe flood. But this matchup honestly went the way I would expect to go against Golgari. They usually have a very hard time keeping their board wide enough against all the creatures that come at them, although our opponent did play a more anemic than normal version, I would say. We don't even need to cast the Pride of the Conquerors there. That's possibly a little bit of BM on my part with a still had all these type of effect, but it's really hard to resist casting Pride of the Conquerors when you have the opportunity. Pride of Conquerors. I don't know why I always put a "the" in there. Okay, this hand is good. We're on the play, which is excellent. We have a Skymarcher into a Vanguard. If we draw a land, we can go Skymarcher and Loxodon on 3, which is fantastic. And a Tribunal, of course, to mop up something that we can't deal with or just run over. So, solid keep. Have a Skymarcher Aspirant. Alright, now we get a double 1-drop turn 2, which is better than playing a Vanguard because it allows us to play our Loxodon next turn. But actually, let's think about that. We could also play the Vanguard and then play both of these and Loxodon next turn anyway. The Vanguard represents more damage and the indestructibleness. Our opponent used a turn 1 swamp. That usually tells me cards like Fungal Infection, cards like Deadweight. Let's attack first, see if the opponent takes any action. But the later we expose our Vanguard, the more likely those removal spells will be used elsewhere. And also Golden Demise sweeping up the Vanguard is scary. So let's play out these creatures instead of the Vanguard, and then next turn we'll Loxodon those creatures and keep the Vanguard in the back of the bus, waiting for the coast to be clear. Now, well, we could go completely ham and play the Vanguard and the Loxodon. Well, you only live once, my friends. This is still very bad against a Golden Demise, but at the same time, we also represent so much damage. If they don't have it, they could be completely dead. And if they do have it, we still have a lot of damage coming their way. Oh no, they're going to take all this damage. If we draw a permanent, and that's a permanent, we get the City's Blessing, and the Snubhorn does its thing as well. That's a lot of damage. And it is enough. That is a turn 4 kill. That, holy cow. All right, this hand has 1-drop, 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 Loxodon. You can't mulligan things like that, plus a Pride of the Conquerors. We're on the draw. It's the only bad thing to be said. We will lead on the Aspirant because it has a power and toughness to attack with. Bodyguard likes having something to protect. Snubhorn could block the Pelt Collector. Perhaps that's how we lose this game, is in a bad race, but actually it's very, very unlikely that the Aspirant will be able to attack next turn. Very, very unlikely. I will lead on the Snubhorn Sentry being here on the draw, and with one of the only ways we lose being a bad race, I think that it makes sense to play a blocker here, because almost any creature our opponent plays will pump the Pelt Collector and be able to block the Aspirant. I wouldn't even mind trading the Aspirant for a Harpooner, but since we're trying to get the City's Blessing, we don't want to trade anything for some time. This will be an interesting game. We definitely are playing two creatures. The question is, which creatures do we play? Do we get our lifelink token out there? No matter what, I think we're going to play 2 creatures. The next turn, we will play 2 more creatures and a Loxodon. So the creatures I want out this turn, I want to dissuade my opponent from continuing their attacks. So I will play the Skymarcher Aspirant and the Bodyguard this turn. And the Bodyguard will defend the Aspirant, threatening that if the opponent attacks, I might kill something of theirs. They also don't want to lose their creatures because they likely play with Ghalta. However, many players in Arena only play one way. They attack at all times until the opponent is dead or the game is over. So you have to prepare for that sometimes as a player. But our line is straightforward. Creature, creature, Loxodon, next turn, Pride of Conquerors, smash. Another Kroll. Continues to increase the size of the Pelt Collector, giving that a good attack step. And they are going to be aggressive. Like I said, some players in Arena will be aggressive until they die. We are fine trading our life total because we have lifelink creatures. So I'm going to take a very big beating here for a few turns and try to set up the big swing. Now, our opponent does have access to Ghalta, and if they do play a Ghalta next turn, that's pretty scary because it means we have to win on our backswing, but I think we can compete with it. We may even have to use something like a defensive Pride of the Conquerors. We will see. Anyway, for this turn, Legion's Landing, Snubhorn Sentry, Venerated Loxodon, pumping all the creatures and getting the City's Blessing. And let's see what you can do now. Now remember, it might have been tempting to keep this Skymarcher Aspirant and attack with it to get 2 points of damage in instead of a +1/+1 counter, but remember that these have reach. That is often forgotten, and it's easy to forget, but the Kroll Harpooners do have reach, so there was no free unblockable attack that turn. Not one that wouldn't have traded, which I don't want to trade when I have Pride of the Conquerors. And now our opponent's sitting back and respecting the board. I'll play the Dauntless Bodyguard. Who should it protect? Our Loxodon is our biggest creature. Our Lifelinker might be our best creature, and we do have other 4/4s. I'll protect the elephant. I'll protect the elephant in the room. Now we'll attack. It probably doesn't matter who it's protecting, because unless the opponent has Pause for Reflection, the Convoke Fog, I don't see how they're going to get out of this with many living things. The Dauntless Bodyguard protects it, so that's an ambitious double block going after that 4/4. You may as well go after a different 4/4 when you know that the Bodyguard is protecting it. And you, who are you protecting? You're protecting the Skymarcher. Who would you like to shoot a harpoon through today? All right. And here it is. The Conquerors, very prideful, have some damage. Down to 3, and let's see if the opponent with their House of Forests can recover. Druid of the Cowl. All right. And the scoops. Okay, our first hand with the Benalish Marshal today. If we draw another planes, that's online. In the meantime, we have Bodyguard, Loxy. Will I need to draw another creature or a planes to make that happen? On the play, I believe I can keep the hand. It's not the greatest, but it has all the pieces. And whether we draw another land or another creature, it gets to do something very impressive on turn 3. What we don't want to draw are more Conclave Tribunals, more Loxodons, and more 3-drops. So that's a little percentage of the deck. It is a little bit sketchy since we're on the play and don't have an extra draw step. So certainly not a slam dunk, but has all the potential in the world. And there we go. Our opponent opened on Stone Quarry. A little Boros tap land action. And please have another land. This is not good for you. Did you keep a 1-lander? Okay, they're psyching me out. Bodyguard, similar to Adanto Vanguard, holds priority, so I do try to use the pass turn button appropriately. All right, we could play the Marshal, or we could play the Loxodon. I don't want to trade away my creatures right now, and I don't have to if my opponent can't gain life and I play the Loxodon followed by a Marshal next turn, but Marshal into Marshal is really good. It's just, when do you take the time out for your Loxodon if you're playing Marshal into Marshal? So I like to lead on the Loxodon. Even if our opponent does gain life, our creature's sizing will keep up, but if they fail to gain life, they won't have a good block next turn once the Marshal comes down. In History of Benalia, our opponent's on a similar white strategy, but no good attacks in this spot yet. Okay, land off the top. We're definitely playing the Marshal. The question is, do we also wish to play a Conclave Tribunal? We could take the History. If we took the History, they would be down a Knight and the Pump effect. We could also take the Pride Mate. I really don't know what's going on with their life total yet, but I believe that being aggressive is the best course of action here. I like to hang on to my removal spell until I know exactly what I need to remove, and none of what our opponent has now is stopping us from attacking. So I like to do as much damage as possible. Putting pressure on the opponent's life total can force them into bad, or at least difficult decisions later, and bad blocks, which is like value, but you know, it's like getting value that your opponent has to give you to stay alive. It feels bad for them, it's great for you. All right, Leonin Vanguard. a Militia Bugler. Our opponent does have a board presence, and they will gain a little bit of life for their Ajani's Pride Mate. All right. No good attacks unless the Pride Mate wishes to, and at 6 life, I don't recommend it. Okay, so this is a tough turn because, well, there's the easy mode and there's the hard mode. There's play Benalish Marshal, attack, make the opponent deal with it, probably leaving back our other marshals so they don't kill that in combat, and then they have some pretty tough blocks. How would they block? They would probably put a Bugler and a Knight in front of a Bodyguard. They might put the Pride Mate in front of something, but yeah, they do have to start trading off their board. That's very vicious. The other way is to go Skymarcher, Hawk, Conclave Tribunal on something, which again leaves them in very tough blocks. If we took away their Pride Mate from them here, they still have a bunch of very difficult blocks. And we have an even better attack for next turn. I actually think that's better than playing the Marshal, because that gives us air power, and air power plus Marshals next turn is most likely lethal. So let's tap our summoning sick creatures and the Marshal that we don't want to attack with, and our last plains. Use a Tribunal, we'll take away their largest creature, and let's move into combat and continue to pressure them and make them come up with some pretty awkward blocks on these creatures. Remember, we have a Bodyguard that protects a Bodyguard. It's possible we could save one, but I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Actually, do we? Yeah, we do. It's this one. And this one defends nothing because it was the first play of the game. Now, I wouldn't sacrifice a Bodyguard to save a Bodyguard unless the Bodyguard is also double blocked, and it looks like that is what's happening. So if I save this one, then they lose to, let's see, I could either trade my Bodyguard for a creature and lose both. I think my creatures are more valuable because I have the Marshal next turn. So, yeah. It's one of those little things that likely doesn't matter, but you never know. All right, it's big turn time. Lyra Dawnbringer is the kind of card that makes this game interesting again. Instead, a Leonin War Leader will not against our flyers. And a little bit of damage, a little bit of vigilant damage from for the road from the opponent, and they scoop it up as the flyers will kill them. Okay, this hand is everything you could want and on the play. We get to play Bodyguard, landing, snub in the first 3 turns, then the Marshal to bump them up. Probably leading on landing so the Bodyguard can protect something, but we also have attacker the next turn. Let's get it. Here we go. Sacred Foundry. Could be an awkward mirror match. This is an interesting spot. I could play double Snubhorn Sentry and save the Bodyguard to possibly protect the Benalish Marshal. But that gives us less attacking power next turn. So I think I like to go for the attacking power. It's an aggro deck. Don't forget to be aggro. As a control mage, that is not complete hyperbole or nonsense. I sometimes do forget to be aggro. A Knight of Grace has shown up. That is a decent blocker for sure. And it will nullify the attacks. However, flipping the Legion's Landing here is probably a worthy endeavor, because the opponent, say, kills our bodyguard, take 1. This flips, we play the Snubhorn Sentry, actually take more than 1, take 3 because of the Marshal. Yeah. And if we're against Boros Angels, we have to kill them before Lyra Dawnbringer becomes an option, because it will hurt a lot. Okay, they make that block. Oh, you don't want to make that block. Okay, so we can sacrifice our bodyguard to kill their knight. I think that's what we do here. It does give the opponent a little bit more life, but getting that knight, which is a pretty problematic blocker for a good amount of our deck, off the battlefield is important. Uh-oh. Lightning Strike for the Marshal, and we're back to a low power base, but we draw the Loxodon. We can make a 1/1 soldier with lifelink with Adanto, play our land, and now the Loxodon can pump the squad. What a great draw. And the City's Blessing achieved makes our Snubhorn Sentries 4/4s. This is a huge turn for the opponent. They need a big play. An Aurelia could at least block for a turn, but they would take a ton of damage. A follow-up Lyra would be very hard to beat. Instead, we see Lightning Strike. 1-for-1 removal is not going to be good enough against these creatures, and that is a pack it up, pack it in for the Boros Angel deck. Well, to be honest, my friends, I was holding out and trying to play a lot more games and find a competitive matchup, maybe something against Control or something like that, but honestly, game after game has been a quick, thorough smashing in favor of this white deck. It's an excellent arena ladder deck. I'm surprised I'm not seeing more of it already, and hopefully after watching this video, you too may want to take it out and play it in arena, because it grinds quickly. Maybe it will be the new red aggro. We shall see. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll try out the deck, and I will see you, as always, in the next video. Goodbye.